So I co-founded an active learning lab that explores virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. And I did this because prior to this venture, I worked in Wall Street and I was an options trader. And I covered technology. And one of the sectors that we were covering at the time was the rapid change in not just graphic cards, but also the processing. And I wanted to know what was driving this. I understood that automotive was changing, that there was a lot of new hardware developing. And so as I started to research more and more on that, I realized that there was a whole new wave of technology that was kind of rivaling 1992 and the internet. And so that's kind of why I got into this space, but it's not really the main reason. So our mission at TecnoLatinx is to empower communities to create and be active in this space, not just to consume and not just to be spectators, but it's really important for us to make sure that everybody that we touch upon is able to say, you know what, I could do this, I could participate. And to do that, we created the TecnoLatinx Mobile Lab. As I mentioned, coming from Wall Street into a social enterprise was very different. It's any startup, it's self-funded, and so we wanted to see what were the lessons that we could learn that we could potentially scale. This is a prototype lab, and we hope to make it a national prototype to bring to underserved communities. The real why. I grew up in Latin America, and the last city that I lived before I moved to California was Tijuana. And Tijuana has one of the major international borders in the Western Hemisphere. There is over 70,000 passengers that cross every single day via car. But that also creates a sense of entrepreneurship. There's a lot of vendors that go out, and that's how they make their living. And for me, this became my first business venture. When I was very young, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 testicular cancer. And it was so aggressive that it was inoperable, but even though he had multiple rounds of chemo, he wasn't able to beat back the cancer, if you will. But my dad was determined to live until I was long enough or old enough to remember him. And miraculously, he did live until I was a teen. But that also meant that he wasn't able to work a job, and so we relied on his Social Security disability benefits. And at that time, it was $1,200 a month for a family of 4. So that is the reason we lived in Tijuana and not in San Ysidro, because we couldn't afford it. A year after that picture was taken, I was at that border selling sodas to help pay my family's rent. And that gave me a sense of, I felt powerless because I was so young, and I didn't have access to any tools or technology that could help me make a better living. So manual labor was what I had to rely on. And so I went car to car when we first started, and we bought couple liters of soda, a big block of ice, and we set up before the sun rose. And as I walked around every car asking, do you want to buy a cup of soda for $0.25, it was motivation so that I could really understand the value of not just work, but hard labor. And the alternatives to what that hard labor would be is what propelled me through college and law school and then into finance. When I came to the United States, I wasn't able to buy a computer because $1,200 a month, right? And so this is 1996. I started UCLA in 96. And I was at such a disadvantage because I had never used the internet and I had never really operated a computer. But I knew they existed because living in Tijuana, you see all of the technology, all of the hardware come out from this side. It's such a binational city. So I understood I had a big sort of ground to make up. Today, 80% of LAUSD students live in poverty, and that is 580,000 people. And these children are basically back where I was, without access to hardware, without able to understanding the software. And because of that is really the reason, the actual reason why I co-founded TecnoLatinx. I understood from a business perspective that it was going to be a huge new market. I understood that kids were going to be left behind and that they would have to play catch up. And I understood that without having an input of an entire community, the industry itself wouldn't develop as diverse as it could. Today, $25,750 is what it's considered to be poor in America. So it's a little bit more than what my dad received in his benefits, and the computer power that's needed for an actual XR machine is around $3,000, right, with the right graphic cards, with the right speed. And so I realized that the only way to be able to introduce this technology to the community was to offer stations so that students can come and so that they could experience what it would be like to create something for themselves. The way we do this is our social impact. We work with 800. We don't work with 800,000. Our pool of potential users are 800,000 underserved students in Los Angeles County. And our main goal is to create not just educational workshops, but also workforce development. And the way we do that is we create an arts-based curriculum. When I go into a community and I talk about emerging technology, oftentimes it's this sense of it's abstract, I don't get it, how it applies to me, and why could I do this if I barely have access to the internet. And so ArtSpace helps us create a community relationship with other art organizations that are able to then say, look, we have this art that we've created here, how do we incorporate and expand the canvas, and how do we expand our reach using emerging technology? When we have students come to the lab and they start to create a VR world, story world, and they come up with some sort of technological block, they're able to now go and understand the mechanisms in which we can overcome this block. And so in that way, we're exploring not just the tech itself, but the content creation and then the distribution of it to other people in the community. Art has really been what has allowed us to connect really on a deeper meaning with the community, as opposed to saying, I'm going to teach you how to code. There's a lot of other organizations that are already teaching people how to code, and so we come on not necessarily as a competitor, but more as a complementary system. And we did this outside of LAUSD because we're a parallel learning delivery system or knowledge delivery system. Trying to get into LAUSD is very difficult because there's a whole process that takes months and sometimes years. And so for us to be able to iterate quickly, we created this lab in downtown LA. So how we work is typically we go to a community organization or a school. We travel to the site. We do in-person, hands-on, immersive experiences. We bring equipment. We bring the latest technology. Like we already have our Quests. When the Ghosts came out, we had those. And so we bring the technology to be able to explain the hardware. What is the hardware and what can you do with this hardware? How do I explain to someone what a software is that's run on Unity if they never tried, for example, the simplest Unity run program, which would be TiltBrush, right? And so once I have a student, a teacher, a community member try what these programs are, this software is, then I'm able to explain what are the career paths, what are the academic paths that come with this. But I don't do this alone. We have mentors that work at DreamWorks, at Pixar, Facebook, and so they're the ones that are providing our sort of roadmap for the future to be able to develop what would be best, not just received, but what would be the most advantageous content for us to deliver. So this is Self-Help Graphics. It's a Chicano-based organization in Boyle Heights. Boyle Heights is ongoing rapid change and displacement. Pricing for housing is very high, and so we chose East LA for the purpose of going into a community that has a lot of talent, has a lot of community organizations that are very entrenched in civic rights and activism. And so we thought, can we get this community of artists to not just create content, but then distribute it in their community? And the answer was yes. So we first did the class in February. We came back in the summer, in June. We did a whole 10 days of workshops, and then we had a community event where you have the parents, the grandparents trying out all of the technology. Because it's also their summer social showcase, we had some of the older Chicano artists that were part of supporting this organization. And so by having these well-respected community leaders try the technology and be able to create some of the programs there, the younger artists, the people that look up to these leaders are able to then say, you know what, I want to try this. And that's when I realized that people want to feel a part of something. And it's not just in the isolated world of, I want to learn how to do XR or EmTech. Like, none of my kids have ever said that, but really they're saying that, they're just using different words. And so for me to be able to get that content out there, I have to be able to code switch it into a way that says, what's in it for you, what's in it for the community, what's in it for really like the technology as a whole, and how your participation is so important. We do this by having the location-based events. And so we start with experiential education, which you guys saw on the previous slide. And then we create multimedia art. It's the reason we partner with established organizations, so there's a connectivity to the work that the students have been doing. We then do something that's socially conscious in theme. And the reason for that is because we go to activist organizations. We want someone that could then take their knowledge and pass it and pay it forward. We then do immersive entertainment because now there's an art piece, there's some sort of a gallery, and we're bringing that to the east side. Typically, I go and experience art, immersive art in Venice and Pasadena, which is great, but a lot of the students that we work and the communities we serve don't have access to reliable transportation. So in that sense, we're bringing in the technology and all of the goodness that comes with the tech to the community. And for us, that's a knowledge transfer system. So an LBE, to the degree that it's usually an activation for marketing, for us is an activation for knowledge transfer. This is two of our youngest artists. We created a piece called Migrant Mama for an organization that had a huge activation last weekend, and it was 3,000 people in East LA, 80% women, 70% Latino, and for me, working with women organizations and with Chicano organizations and with art, civic organizations is important because it's something that it's an isolated market segment, right? When we go back to like now my economic background, it's an isolated market segment that for most of the computer industry has been hard to reach. And all of a sudden we're reaching it, and we're just not reaching it, but we're able to get feedback. So we've worked with other organizations at this point to be able to test out their software, to be able to provide a point of view, a perspective that otherwise wouldn't be provided. So this is our Migrant Mama VR theater, and again, it happened last weekend. We had a lot of the students, we had about 400 people that went through this event. We had lines out the door. And the reason I showed these pictures in particular was because we have the young kids coming in and seeing work that a 14-year-old in their community created, that a 12-year-old created. And when they put on the headset and they see what their peer that's standing right there did, and then I asked them, so is that something you could create? They say, yes, of course, right? So we're talking about technical exploration, but I'm not saying, hey, come code. But we're saying the same thing, and we're approaching it just in a different way. On the left, we have the green screen, and that was because we went to Noni de la Peña's Emblematics studios to learn how to activate Reach, which is her new platform. When I told the community that Reach and what we were doing with Reach was being debuted at the Wall Street Journal's Future of Everything conference in New York City, there was a sense of pride that this very novel piece of work is now being brought to the community, and that they're experiencing it in a way that's friendly, that's not intimidating, and that's surrounded by their community. So because the VR that we created for that specific experience was created by local teen girls, the community really rallied and waited in line, even though there was a whole activation going elsewhere. And they waited to see what it was like to not just go into a space to have this new experience, but to be around all of this other technology. We had our partners at USC Immersive Lab be there explaining. We had people from Pixar and DreamWorks be the mentors. So these are all the people that already work with us, but because they're in an environment that's friendly, all of a sudden questions start to flow. And how do I do this? And if I want to go to school, what do I study? So these are questions that are in the seats a lot of times, but that are not able to be articulated. Again, people want to feel a part of something. So in this case, Molcajete or guacamole. California, we all love, the sense of the Mexican, California fusion food. And so for me, guacamole is one of like my favorite dishes. So one of our students that was created, and that was Anna, which you saw in the previous slide, one of our students was created a whole kitchen where her migrant mama, the woman that she was honoring, would gather and congregate. But she couldn't find guacamole and she couldn't find a molcajete. So we went online and we looked to see what would be available. So this is the molcajete on the Google Poly store, which is where you could grab, if the item is remixable, you could take that item and put it into your Wolt. There wasn't one. So then that became like my older, more experienced students then started to sculpt these items on Medium to be able to upload them so that other students, as we teach, are able to pull these objects so that they can create an actual world. The other part is, it's not just that it's a molcajete as the object itself, but that as a student, I could call it what I call it at home. That there was an object called a guacamole, but if I'm a student that's very young creating these worlds, I don't want to call it that because it doesn't resonate, right? But it's the same object, so it's just delivering the information a little bit different. This part is driving our social change efforts because students are so excited about building a world within a world that reflects them, right? And so for us to be able to be successful and to have done all of the work we did so far, we have partnered with other nonprofits, which are the community organizations. With tech companies, we have received support from Sketchfab, from Facebook, from Samsung. And it's also bringing in not just the technology, the software, the hardware, but it's also providing for the companies an isolated market segment opinion and shaping the products, because at the end of the day, these are going to be your end users. Latinos are driving the population growth in the United States, so it makes sense to engage with that population. Educational institutions, we go to different schools, to different high schools, middle schools, elementaries. We're working with Cal State LA and Cal State Long Beach to bring in our equipment there and our lessons. Labor agencies, 2 months ago, we were contacted by the Social Entrepreneur and Innovation Lab from the California Chamber of Commerce. They have a tech talent pipeline, and that's to diversify the tech industry within Los Angeles. So we'll be hosting 6 of their interns that are going to be paid by the LA Chamber of Commerce so that they could be at our office learning to do what we do. We also bring in, we go to a lot of conferences and we do a lot of the sharing online, but we also bring in students to F8. We bring students to not ALXR, but there's another one that's called Digital Entertainment World in Los Angeles, and we were able to secure tickets through partnerships, not because it's like, here's the tickets, but hey, we have these students, this is what we're working on, would you mind giving us some tickets? And I have found that organizations are very willing to help, and so we take students to different community or to different tech events, we're able to then share it, and we have community saying, hey, I understand now what this is, why it matters, and how it could apply to me. And that is something that when we first started talking about F8 and East LA, nobody knew what it was, what it meant, or why it was important. Let me see. So how we do the work, we do interns. We hire students from Cal State LA, Cal State Long Beach under the work study program. We pay them $20 an hour. Because we're a nonprofit, we take advantage of the nonprofit status, and so we really only out of pocket pay $7 an hour. So you have a student that's being paid $7 an hour out of pocket to me to be able to teach them how to create VR sculptures, how to learn how to do Unity, to be able to train themselves to then become a student teacher. And those are the student teachers that then teach my younger students, my middle school, my elementary. So I'm creating my own workforce. We then promote them to actual teachers, so then they're starting to train the artists, the professionals that are coming in to say, I want to expand my work into a different canvas. And it's sort of like the cycle. We, at all times, nurture them through our contacts that are working professionals, that are willing to give back and that are happy to give back. And so this is Steve. Steve graduated from this high school. That was his art classroom. His teacher knew that now Steve is working with us. His teacher is Adriana, all the way to the left, holding the go. And once she realized that Steve had been doing the 3D sculptures for the Migrant Mama experience, she was so excited that her student is able to now pay it forward to a larger community in a different field. So she wrote a grant to be able to bring us to her school. So this is paid work that allows me to then continue to pay my students to be able to teach and expand our reach. with the other two students that are there, you could see Leilani kind of behind Steve, but then now those were the students that won the contest that she had, and so those are the students that are now learning to become teachers themselves. So I leave with this quote, and I love this quote because it's really creating a community around students and a supportive environment where students feel able to explore not just the hardware, the software, but the sense of play, the sense of art making, and yeah, so that's the work that we have been doing. Partnerships have been super important to us, and definitely leveraging work study has been, I think, the biggest change, because when I was in when I was in college, I worked at the dorms with my work study. So I always tell my students, you're so lucky because you're learning something super cool and you get to use it later on. And I think it's a model that could be used by different technology companies in helping train a diverse workforce for very cheap at that. Thank you. And if anybody would like to contact us, more information, partnerships, this is my information. We're always looking to partner with community organizations. We work with grants and with city funding to be able to be sustainable and pay our team. But so far, we've been able to work with really almost anyone. And individual teachers also are very powerful for change because they are writing grants that are $1,000, $1,500, and that brings us to their school. So we're not even talking like a lot of money, but the change is tangible and it's really, really exponential.